All right.
Okay, everyone, thank you for coming today. The Office of Research and Innovation is starting a series where we are looking at how you actually do research and process. So we're going to be taking on different types of popular things that researchers need to do, and just talking through how an actual process is it done. So we are thankful today to Claire Clifton, who is a PhD student in clinical psychology, and Nathaniel Steinlicht, who is I don't know your actual title now,
Grants Development Manager,
at the,
University of Minnesota Morris.
yes. They're going to come talk to us today about a project that the two of them developed and led on scoping reviews. So hopefully this is helpful. And if you enjoy this session and would like to hear about other types of research topics, please always feel free. You can email me. I'm the director of ORI, so you're always welcome to email me. Or you can email ORI at ori@usd.edu. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Claire and Nathaniel.
All right. Thank you, Bridget, for the introduction. As I said, I'm Nathaniel. And so I'll sort of start us off with a little bit to talk about scoping reviews, and then Claire and I will sort of tag team, and she'll end up with talking about an example for a paper that is currently, I can't remember what the status of the paper is. It's being reviewed or in the peer review process right now. Claire, if you want to go to the next slide. Um, So what is a scoping review? Out of curiosity, if people like want to just use the zoom hands feature, has anybody done a scoping review before? Great. I'm assuming that's why you're all here. Okay, Susan's done one. Great. That would make some sense. Um, so then most people probably aren't familiar with it, or maybe you've seen it when you've looked at journals and you've seen a scoping review on X. So a scoping review is a type of literature review, and it looks similar in process to a lot of them. There's usually you have a search criteria, you're looking at specific journals. You're usually having reviewers to decide which journal articles to include or not include. Um, but it's has a specific type and purpose. It is a preliminary assessment of what the literature is around a certain type of topic. You really just want to say, okay, for all of this topic around a topic like telehealth and sexual assault for sexual assaults, nurse examiner care, what is out there? What's the nature and what is the extent? Sort of where is the boundaries for that body of literature? It's not evaluating the quality of that literature. It's not evaluating whether it's good. It's not evaluating even the results to try and draw some sort of broader conclusions. It's literally just drawing a circle around a subset of literature to say, this is what we know. And so it really is just answering a very simple question of what does the literature say about X? And it can be about a specific topic, methodology, even specific types of survey research. It can get as specific as you want, although you don't want to get too specific because then you might end up with two articles. So next slide. So to give you kind of a couple of examples of, or some for instances on when you might want to do a scoping review. Say you're a PhD student, or I guess any graduate student or even undergrad student. You have a research topic, which is not just something like telehealth, it's something telehealth in a specific case. It's a focused topic, but you don't really know fully about the boundaries because you want to learn more to decide if it's going to become your dissertation, your thesis, or something along those lines. A scoping review helps you refine that and say, okay, here's what we know. Here's what the literature is. And from there, you can then sort of start to identify, okay, here's what they say the research gaps are, or here's where they say the next steps are, or here's what the limitations are. And you're really just defining the boundaries. And then you can look at that and say, okay, I really see a big area here where I can contribute something. Um, it can also be helpful for organizations if you're doing a planning for a project to understand what the scientific, or sometimes you can even include gray literature, so governmental reports, white papers, things like that, to understand, okay, what is the body of knowledge around this specific topic? So we use something that's evidence-based. And that is partially the purpose for this scoping review. It was academic focused, and so all of the literature we included in our example was academic, but it was also sort of to define the boundaries of, so for a healthcare system who doesn't offer telehealth services for sexual assault, nurse examiner care, what is out there, what is known about that, and what do we know in terms of some of the feedback surrounding that and the services offered. So that if you're looking at starting up your own, you could start to see where the body of literature is. And the last would be to serve as the basis for a systematic review. In terms of like the timeline, that Booth citation I met that was on the previous slide is a really good art reference book in terms of anything literature review. They reference scoping reviews as often a precursor to a systematic review. And a systematic review is typically you're evaluating something. So you're evaluating the quality of the research around a particular topic just so that you can say, okay, like we know a lot about X, but actually the research isn't very good. There's not, and especially if you're getting into things like clinical applications, maybe we have some good like patient surveys, but we haven't done any clinical trials, or we've done some clinical trials, but they haven't been double-blind clinical trials. Like you can start to evaluate where things are at, and that's a scoping review basically sets the boundaries for that. So if you're a PhD student and you're then looking to turn this into another paper, you can sort of grow down there. All right, so next slide, which I think is also me. The Prisma SCR guidelines. So Prisma is, oh boy, I don't know I don't think I remember what the actual what it stands for now, but Prisma is a set of guidelines broadly around best practice for doing literature reviews and meta-analysis. That's what the MA is. I don't know what the PRIS is. The SCR after this is a subset of the Prisma guidelines focused on specifically for scoping reviews. And there's a link at the end of these slides too that I included. What these are a checklist of best practices for when you're doing a scoping review, what do you need to include? And they're best practices. Most journals will follow those. Sometimes they'll have some deviations. Sometimes there will be things they say you don't need. But for the most part, they will require that you follow the Prisma SCR guidelines if you're publishing a scoping review. So it's a good thing to just do from the jump, follow from the jump, because whatever journal you try to submit this to, if you plan on publishing it, um, will want you to fund it. And it helps you sort of think through everything from the start, especially in terms of things like, thank you, Clara, for putting in what that stands for. It helps you think through the things that you need to know, such as what's going to be your eligibility criteria? What kind of articles are you going to allow? What are you not going to allow? What sort of data fields do you think you're going to be interested in? How are you going to decide who stuff is going to get included or not? Who's going to be making those judgment calls? And we'll talk about that when we talk about reviewers. And then how do you plan to synthesize your results? All of this is stuff you want to have set up from the front. It's not set in stone, though. Because as like we were going through this process, specifically in terms of data charting, we would have a bunch of fields and then we'd be like, oh, actually, there's probably three more things that we want to know now that we know what we've already done. Um, but it's a good checklist to follow, and I highly recommend even just looking at it if you want to see sort of what the requirements for a scoping review are as you're planning one. It's a good thing to look up. All right, now turn it over to Claire.
So, when you're conducting a scoping review, obviously that involves a lot of searching literature. So the first thing you want to do um, for the process of the search is determine the purpose of the review and develop a research question. So when you're determining the purpose of the review, this is a really good time to make sure that a scoping review is the best type of research to do. Um, for your intended purposes. And after you make sure that a scoping review is really the route you want to take and is most appropriate, you should develop a research question, which will help guide the rest of the process. Then you would want to determine your inclusion and exclusion criteria. in your key terms as well, a list of those. And so this, again, these will all be coming from the purpose of the review, and your research question will really help you guide these as well. Then you'll want to determine the databases to search and whether or not you'll be including gray literature, um, white papers, those types of things, or just if you're only interested in searching the academic literature. Again, this will be influenced by your research question. Um, You'll then create the search strings. And so these may be slightly different for each database, just with the format and syntax that each database requires. So that's an important thing to make sure you're doing. I know when we were doing our scoping review, we spent some time figuring out the best syntax for each database. Then you'll want to review the initial results and check for false positives. And so this is something that we'll talk about a little bit later, but we discovered that one of our key terms was giving us a lot of false positives. And so we decided to remove that key term from our search string after reviewing our initial results. So then you would refine the list of key terms and search strings to make sure you're minimizing any false positives or false negatives where you can. And then you would identify records through searching with the final search string and export those records. So exporting records, these are the databases we used. And so I thought it would be helpful to include this information if somebody is unfamiliar or maybe intimidated by the process of exporting these records. So these are just our notes from our scoping review protocol. I won't go through them in depth and in detail, but I think since this is recorded and I believe these slides will be sent out, this would be something that would probably be helpful to reference. It did take us a little while to figure out the best way to do this, and how that worked. And then I'll transfer it back to Nathaniel.
Okay. So record cleaning. So you see we had 5 different databases for this paper we were working in. Um, they all they all capture different information, and some of them are more complete than others. Like I think PubMed has dozens of columns. They had, I think, the most number of fields that they would give you when you exported the data. They all store it a little differently. So sometimes when they use the journal name, they'll store it as the acronym, which is what PubMed does, versus Complete is another one that's common in health sciences, specifically nursing. They use the full journal name. So those are some challenges in how the formatting is that you have to sort of keep in mind when you're trying to identify duplicates, which is at this stage what we have, because we'll have essentially 5 spreadsheets that we need to collapse into one. And we need to make sure that, Smith's 2012 article in the Journal of Forensic Nursing is in 3 databases. There's only actually one record, because we want to just look at one article, not because it's the same article across 3 databases. Um, the same thing is sometimes I don't believe PubMed, when you export them, it exports the abstracts for whatever reason. So in this case, we had to actually go and get their document identification number, and have that be what we would search for when we got to the abstract and review phase. Um, what this amounts to in the end is combining all those spreadsheets together, so that with some common columns, which included uh, article title, first author name, year, journal, um, and abstract. And so we had all of them together. Google has a nice, or I should say Excel has a nice remove duplicates tool that you can look up on how to use. That removes them once initially. Um, and so then it was to go through by hand and identify specific additional articles that were seemed to be duplicates. And then sometimes even after, as we were going through the review phase, we would identify, be like, oh, for some reason, this didn't get flagged after going through doing 3 checks of this for duplicates. So it's a thing to always keep in mind as you're even going through the review process that have I read this abstract before? This abstract seems familiar to go back and look, because you really just want to have each line in your final review be an article and it be unique. Um, then the final list got provided to the reviewers, which were Claire and I. And I think I'm talking next about the review process too. Um, so if we can go to the next slide. So the review process, there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. And if you've looked at scoping reviews or systematic reviews, um, it can be done a bunch of different ways depending on how you want to do it. It looks a lot similar to anybody who's done qualitative research before, of usually having at least 2 coders or 2 reviewers to look at a thing and decide if it should or should not be included. Um, Sometimes Claire and I disagreed, or we thought, oh, maybe it doesn't. And so we would have to bring in a third person, which was Bridget, to be the tiebreaker, essentially. Um, and so that was our process. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, and it just depends on um, how you want to do it. Claire and I were reviewers for both the screening at the title and abstract phase, and then the screening after reading the full article phase. Sometimes you can have different reviewers for each if you have a big enough team. But it was a very small team that we were working on this on the side. But we were looking at it in the first phase. Does the title and the abstract seem to meet the criteria? Yes, it was moved into a new spreadsheet. Um, if it didn't, it was excluded. Then in the second phase, we actually requested all of the articles, read all of them, and then we would meet to discuss yes or no. And again, if there was any conflict, because it was just 2 of us, we need someone to break the tie, and that was Bridget. Especially since it's important if you're going to have your tiebreaker to be someone with subject matter expertise. We also, at this point, once we were at the full article review phase, we were looking specifically through the reference lists of those articles to see if there were other articles we had not captured in our searches already that we might have missed. And another thing to keep in mind, this process is very time intensive. It was less time intensive for us because I think by the time we got to the title and the abstract phase, we were only looking at 200 articles. Um, but that's still a lot of time. Like I think it took us maybe 2 hours to go through all the title and abstract. And if you're doing through an even larger topic, or your initial research question is maybe a little less defined, or there's a lot of literature out there, and you're hitting through thousands of articles that you need to screen through, it can take months to go through. And so you might need to redo your search every so often. This project took so long to actually get done that by the time we were in the final phase of getting this ready for publication, it'd been long enough that we actually had to redo the search again, because there were, I think, 4 or 5 articles that would have matched our search criteria that needed to get included back. So time is always a factor, and the review process takes longer than you think if you're going to do this. It takes less time if you have a lot more reviewers to go through things, but again, you need a big team, and it still will take some time too. It also is important to record the reason why an article was rejected, because not really necessarily because the journal might require you, but it's helpful just has that record. Um, there was actually one instance, I think, where um, Claire and I had a disagreement over which article should be included or not. And then Bridget broke the tie to include it. And so we had sort of documented why Claire had rejected, why I approved, and why Bridget had approved. And then as we were going back through and writing, and we are like, gosh, this article is very weird. Why did we approve it? And it was because we had misunderstood some of the search criteria. So Claire was right. Bridget and I were wrong, but it's a good reason just to go back and document that, even if it's just a couple of words of why it should be included or why it shouldn't be. Yes, that's the only time Bridget's ever been wrong. Um, but if we can go to the next slide. We get to the other part of scoping reviews that will take time. So once you review, you then need to go back again and read the article. And this is where you're going to do what's called data extraction, data charting. Again, if you've done qualitative research before, this looks very similar, and it's helpful to actually just think of um, an article as just another transcript you're looking for. You're looking for things that meet your codes or specific things. That was sort of the thing that helped me frame it, even though I've never actually done formal qualitative research, but I know the theory behind it, to think of it as it's just another transcript that you're looking for evidence for your codes. And then you're pulling those examples out, putting them into a column and marking it. So we had specific fields we were interested in that had been sort of defined up to the front with our larger research team. Um, and it was definitely a balance of there were a lot more columns, and then we eventually pared it down a little bit. And then we added new columns as we started to learn more going through it. So it's helpful to have a defined list, but just know that as you're going in through and doing data charting, if you keep seeing something show up, like specifically around for this project, it was related to patient feedback. We saw a lot more things about how there was some different variations in how patient feedback was being recorded, I think, or how patients, what sort of patient feedback was being collected. That was interesting to our research team. And so that was a field that we then had to go back and pull more information from. But you want to have those clearly defined. It's helpful to actually even have a Word document saying, so for this column, this is what we mean when we say patient feedback. And for this column, when we say, this is what we mean when we say hospital staff feedback. What does that mean? Because at this case, once we got to the data extraction phase, it was actually three people reading through, and one of them was not one of the reviewers. And so it was helpful to have a reference saying, okay, this is what we mean, so that we know this is what it is. And we all are clearly pulling out the same things because we all weren't reading the same articles and pulling out the same information. Um, and again, it's an iterative process. You might need to go back and do this again. Again, if you have the time and the staff, it's helpful to have two people do um, data extraction off each article. And then you compare and you contrast and you can do some of those qualitative research things. We were very much on a shoestring time budget. And so we split up the articles we had to review among three people. We each had our articles and we um, did the data extraction there. And then we went to the actual final part, which was writing the paper, which I think Claire's going to talk about now.
Yes, so I thought it would be helpful. We thought it would be helpful to go through the example of how we did our scoping review. And so we started, our research question was really just what do we know about the use of telehealth technology to serve sexual assault patients? And so the purpose of this review was to understand the current state of the literature regarding the use of telehealth technology to conduct sexual assault nurse examiner provided exams. And so the databases we used based on this purpose and this research question were PubMed, CINAHL, PsycInfo, Health Source Nursing Academic, and Web of Science. And so this is one example of our search string. We did have a couple others, and they all use the same key terms, but you'll notice that there is parentheses, and there's a lot of or, and there's and. And so that took a lot more time than we expected, was figuring out how to develop the search string that is best in line with the syntax of the database itself. And so you can see our key terms. We wanted to, make sure we were capturing all sorts of telehealth. And so that's one part of it. And then the sexual assault part was really those two main chunks of our search terms. And so our inclusion criteria, again, going back to that purpose of the review. So telehealth exam services must have been provided to serve sexual assault patients. So we would get, articles come up in our search about domestic violence, or, you know, non-sexual type of assault. And so those articles were screened out, unless the domestic violence was specifically sexual assault related. Um, Article must be in English, just due to the language abilities of our research team. Um, and a sexual assault nurse examiner must be providing services. So this was something that really narrowed down our search results, was making sure that it is a sexual assault nurse examiner rather than an untrained nurse or another type of provider. We even got quite a few results that were about pediatric populations, where child abuse physicians were conducting these exams. And we ended up filtering these out because if we go back to our purpose is really about understanding the use of telehealth to conduct sane exams, and that focus helped us really make clear inclusion criteria. And then the article must be published research in a peer-reviewed journal, or descriptions of a sane telehealth model. And then we excluded um, articles where the full text was just not available, or the services provided were not focused post-sexual assault services. So this would be, psychotherapy or follow-up visits, women's health visits, those type of things were excluded. And so we can see here, we had a long, long list of topics chosen for data extraction. Um, and so findings about patient input or feedback, nurse input or feedback, and staff or community input or feedback. So lots of different categories here. So you can see why this may take quite a long time, and you may end up needing to go back and update your literature search. Um, and Nathaniel did bring up a very important point that as we were extracting the data and really getting the information about what is out there, it was noticed that patient feedback was really being conducted in a manner that may not provide an opportunity for the full scope of the patient experience or for a deeper understanding of the patient experience. So we decided it would be best to go back and record more and chart more about the patient experience. Um, and then so some general tips and tricks. Carefully check search terms and keywords if search results seem wrong, especially sometimes the databases will think they're being helpful and they'll say, oh, you said sane. Did you mean safe instead? Sometimes it's helpful when you truly make a typo, but in the case of these abbreviations, it wasn't helpful. And so making sure that that is something you're paying attention to, and checking keywords. So one of our keywords that we ended up removing due to a high degree of false positives was the term safe, which could stand for sexual assault forensic examiner. We found, just comparing search results with and without this term, that it really added so many false positives, and did not expand the search results we were getting without this term, that it wasn't useful for us to continue to include it. So we did remove that. Like I talked about before, search strings can differ in syntax across each database. And this is something that the university librarians were able to help with. So don't be afraid to reach out for the librarians to help you. Um, they were really helpful in getting this process started. So we exported all of our results to Excel. So that is what the instructions will have you do We then combined them in the same document to conduct the screening, as Nathaniel was telling you about. And then if you have a large research team, um, use some sort of service that allows you to co-work in real time, rather than having to send things back and forth, or things being only locally saved on someone's computer and being lost. And so just to sum it up, scoping reviews are a preliminary assessment of the literature that aims to identify the nature and scope of available research. You should use the PRISMA guidelines to ensure you're following best practices when conducting a scoping review. And developing a strong research question and clearly defined purpose for the review is very important, because this will help you stay on track when making decisions during the data collection and extraction processes. And that is that.
Thank you guys so much for sharing your process. We want to open it up for questions, and while we're waiting for people to ask questions, I just wanted to start with asking you about the write-up process. So one of the things I had you do was find a model article. Can you talk about the idea of doing that and what that looks like? If you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so yeah, I do remember that um we didn't we were students really leading the charge with this, and so we wanted to get an idea of what a scoping review looked like. And so um we found an article on a similar topic that was a scoping review that really helped give us a guide for what would the finished product look like. How did they structure this? What did they include? What did they not include? And that was a really helpful first step for us to kind of figure out um, just what's going on. What is a scoping review and what does it look like?
And that's something I would suggest for any of you too, particularly if you know what journal you're going for, which we did early on, is to find an article like what you are doing in the journal. So then you can look at how it was done, right? Corey has a question in the chat. His question is, any thoughts on why you chose 5 databases? Always something to consider is the number of databases you choose to search. The more databases, the more complete your search, but the more articles you have to review through.
I think the 5 we picked were basically just identified by our research team. Um, and so it was specifically, I think, PubMed, Cinel, PsycInfo, and Health Source, um, and Web of Science. Those were all identified by a research team. We then also asked a librarian if they had any others or if they had any suggestions. And they basically said, nope, those are great ones. I think we specifically focused on PsycInfo as one to include, because one of our actual co-I on the project actually suggested it might be a good source for some of the things that match this as well. But there wasn't a real like scientific reason for why we identified it. It was just based on general sense.
Is it Canon? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Kanan
Okay.
Sankara.
Asks, what happens if we do not have any hits from the selected databases? Do we start the research again with new databases? What are good databases that you can recommend?
I think in this case, that could be a number of issues. It may not be an appropriate database. It also may be your key terms are not um, well refined, or your search string just has improper syntax. Could be probably the simplest thing if you change the location of some parentheses, or add them or move things around. And so in that case, if you try a few little fixes, and nothing's coming up, that's when I would recommend reaching out to a librarian to kind of get an outside perspective on what might be going on. So yeah, it could be related to the database, the key terms, or the search string. And so that might also be an indication to make sure that your research question and purpose are well defined so that your key terms make sense and go together.
Thank you, Claire.
I would think another workaround with that is if you knew an article that should be included, you could go to that article and see what its keywords are. If you're having difficulty coming up with keywords, you could do it. That could also help. But yes, a librarian is going to be great.
You could
Okay.
also,
Go ahead,
um,
Nathan.
for like PubMed specifically, they have what are called mesh terms, M lowercase e s h. That's their version of key terms. They have a glossary for all of them, and you can sort of see how they define things. So you can drill down specifically, like say if you're interested in cancer research, they have a tree that you could sort of work through to figure it out. And so for PubMed, that might be something specifically. That would probably be a general database for most health sciences. I would say at least look at what PubMed has, because there's a chance most of what you're looking for is there. Um, but that would be one I'd always include if you're looking for just a general recommendation for databases.
Thank you.
Nathaniel, I thought it might be useful if you pulled up the image that went into the publications.
Would love to. I don't have access to that folder anymore, though.
Well, not.
No, I was like, I wonder if they took my access off. I'm like, I hope they did. It's been like a month. I shouldn't have access anymore. I'm off the
That's
IR.
right. We took you off because we took you as soon as you got removed from the IRB. Actually, before as soon as I requested to remove you from the IRB, you got taken off.
Yeah,
That
I'm
is
like, I shouldn't be have access to this anymore. So, but
Is there any limit that you have to have a minimum and maximum, both? Is there any limit that the number of articles you may need to review for any scoping review?
no, I would say, and I think it's at this point where you want to sort of lean on the your example articles. It's helpful like, as you do the search process, you'll come across other scoping reviews and systematic reviews. We did not include that those in our final search results. Um, those are people you might want to see like, okay, what sort of numbers are they hitting? Um, it really depends. Systematic reviews tend to have more articles than scoping reviews, just because they typically are doing some broader analysis. Same with meta-analysis. There tend to be more articles that are included because usually you're doing a specific thing on a well-studied field, or subject. But there's not really a hard and fast rule. And I think even Booth, which I mentioned, I highly recommend that book. There's a copy in the library if you like just paper books. I put the USD library link in the slides. Um, they talk about the numbers, and there's not really a good answer. But it should be enough that you feel comfortable justifying it to peer review to say, yes, there's 10 articles here about this subject, and it's important to cover them. If it's two, maybe think about your subject a little more, and maybe you can broaden out, and maybe it's just not time for a scoping review yet. Um, but there's not really a specific.
See, in your research, you have done 13, right? You have filtered from 371 to 13. Is my understanding correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And I think just to add to what Nathaniel said there, something to consider is if the number at the end of this you get to is something like 371, you might want to consider doing a systematic review or, there are different types of reviews. Scoping reviews are particularly done when there isn't a ton of information on a particular area yet. So it's defining the scope of what we do know compared to like being able to talk about effect sizes across different types of causality strains, right? They're different types of reviews that you would do.
I would add if you get to 371, even if it's a systematic review, you might want to refine your question a little bit because that's going to be a lifetime trying to get through all those.
Yeah, that's a lot of articles to read.
Yeah, so we started with 371 and actually ended up removing over 100 just due to them being duplicates. And most of our records were removed due to ineligibility during the title and abstract screening phase. So we ended up with 13 articles in our um, final review paper. And so that's less than 10% of the original database records, just to show how much you have to filter these down. And I think, again, that goes back to developing a really strong research question and having a very well-defined purpose for the review will really help guide you through this process and through these decisions.
And I should say to note, like one judgment call we made was in terms of so that third box on the right for why we extruded full text articles, we did not allow any conference abstracts. So a lot of the debate databases will include presentation abstracts, especially for bigger scientific conferences. We did not include them because oftentimes it was just the abstract. We couldn't see like what the methods were, what were they saying. Um, we didn't include them, but it could be a thing if you are, sort of doing a coding scoping review on more cutting edge things where it's a process where it's still like the scientific literature is still sort of working its way through. Conference abstracts are a thing you could choose to include. But regardless of whatever search you're going to do, you're going to have to figure out if you want to include conference abstracts or not. Oftentimes they're a source of, okay, there's new innovation happening here, but it's less strict peer review. So you can't be sure about the quality of what is being presented. And sometimes you don't even have the presentation to fully draw upon to do data extraction on.
And I would say also, that did not discuss SANE, where we excluded 8 articles. Um, we were really able to do that because of our strong focus on SANE nurses throughout the review. And so these articles did seem to be eligible at first because a lot of them were pediatric patients getting forensic exams for sexual abuse. So it seemed like they would be accurate, but we had to do quite a bit of digging to really see who was the provider on that exam. And we knew to do that digging because we had a very clear purpose and a very clear question. And so really, I can't emphasize enough how important that is to take a lot of time and be very deliberate about the question you're asking, because that will carry you through the whole process. Any other questions, thoughts?
Well, Nathaniel and Claire, thank you so much for spending some time today with us talking about how you go through this process. I hope that everyone that came found this useful, and as always, we will record and Clara will make that send that out. Again, this is part of an ongoing series. I think the next we're going to do is on developing a survey. So please, if you're not following already, the what's it called? Listserv. Please make sure you sign up for that and watch out for that. Are you signed up for the listserv? Cannon?
Yeah, sorry.
Are you signed up for the listserv?
I have signed up for this one. I am not sure about the next one. I need to check. If I have the information, I will sign it. I will definitely sign it.
Well, are you signed up for the Ori listserv? Do you know?
No.
Uh, if you email ori@usd.edu, we can send you the directions on how to do that, and that's where you'd find out about the next one.
Okay.
Or nope, Clara put it in the chat. Thank you, Clara. So you should be able to follow that link and sign up.
Okay.
For those of you who are on Research Buddies, I will be sending out a doodle poll to set our next meeting where we will talk about survey stuff. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.